Super glad to see so many of you here this morning, and we are going to continue in our series in Proverbs. And today is going to be a very interesting talk. I think it'll be something that will really speak to a lot of people. When I was a little kid, I grew up in Virginia, which is kind of right in the middle between North and South in the States, right on the East Coast. And my grandparents lived about 6 hours south of us in South Carolina. And so a couple times a year, we would drive down to their house in South Carolina. And it was typically quite a bit warmer in South Carolina, a very sandy climate as well. And my grandfather was the pastor of a church. And so whenever we would go down there, it was a very rural area, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And right on the street corner was the church. And about 100 meters down the road, down a dirt road, was the parsonage of the church, and that's where my grandfather lived. Another couple of 100 meters down that dirt road was another parsonage where the other pastor lived, and right beside that house was this big open field. And this big open field was about the size of a rugby pitch, and so whenever we would go down there to hang out with my grandparents, we would almost always spend time just goofing off in that open field. I mean, what more does a little boy need than an open field and some imagination to have a good time? And so we would often spend time in that field. It was a big open field that was lined with really tall pine trees. And that field wasn't always kept very well. Sometimes the grass was very tall. There was actually an old baseball diamond that had been painted in one corner so that if you wanted to have a softball game or baseball, you could have that there. But we would typically just make up games and play them around that field. And oftentimes my dad's siblings would also be there, and so all of their kids and all of our cousins, and you can imagine there was about 12 of us boy cousins, and you can imagine 12 boys in an open field for a few weeks on end, just enjoying the summer, how much trouble we would always get into. But in the middle of this field, spread all around this field were these large anthills. And when I say large, I mean they were like this tall, and they would kind of go down like a volcano, and they were huge, and they were actually these red fire ants. And those hills were mostly sand, but whenever you got up to one of those ant hills, you didn't really see very many ants on the outside. But some of them had been there for a while, and grass had grown up through those ant hills, and you'd see a blade of grass maybe that tall coming out of the top of that ant hill. And so what I used to like to do, probably, I don't know if this is like animal cruelty or what, but I used to like to pull one blade of grass out. And I don't know what the blade of grass was doing in the anthill, but as soon as you'd pop that blade of grass out, I mean like hundreds of ants would just, maybe even thousands, would pour out of that hole, like looking to pick a fight. Like, who did this? Who's attacking the anthill? What's going on here? And I would just watch all of them running around like crazy trying to figure out what's going on. Some of them were busy grabbing some of the sand and replacing it back to where it had been. And I would just do that. I'd go over to the next anthill and do the same thing, and I would watch the ants all scurry all over that anthill. And well, one summer, my cousin brought a go-kart. And again, imagine 12 boys taking turns on a two-seater go-kart. And the game was that you would go through the field as fast as you can, trying to dodge all of these anthills. Well, one time my cousin Ryan, who was about my age, was driving, and we didn't dodge it. We actually caught one of the anthills with the front right tire, and the go-kart launched up what felt like Evel Knievel launching over like 15 school buses. But we launched up in the air, slammed back on the ground, and we looked at each other and we're like, that was awesome! So now the goal was not to dodge the anthills, it was to actually hit the anthills and see how much air you could get. And it didn't take long for all of a sudden, we're driving around, we'd already hit a few anthills, that we start to feel some itchiness all around our body. And so Ryan slams on the brakes, we get off of the go-kart, and we look down, and the go-kart is covered in red fire ants. And now we're smacking ourselves, we're smacking each other, we're freaking out. We got ants all over us, they're biting us, and it was absolutely a crazy time. It's like one of those memories that you will never forget. Maybe, I don't know if you had the phrase that kid has ants in their pants if they can't sit still. Well, we literally had ants in our pants, and it was quite the memory. I don't think I'll ever forget it, coming home and getting in the shower and realizing I had like 100 red ant bites all over my body. But I remember thinking back at that story about how silly the perspective of the ant seemed to me. Right? Like, here we are riding around this field, and sure, I'm sorry, we were destroying anthills, I guess. But to think of an ant that's this big, that is seeing this massive vehicle that's 1,000,000 times the size of it, and somehow it worked itself onto the go-kart, and as we're flying around the field, it found itself to the human bodies that were there, and it's like biting us like it's, what is it doing? Is it protecting the anthill? I mean, what is it actually trying to accomplish? Surely the ant realized that it wasn't going to win this fight. It might do some damage, but it's not going to win. And the more you think about it, the more you realize that if you take the actions of the ant outside of the colony, If you don't think about it in terms of the community and what it was trying to do, then what the ant was doing was actually pretty stupid. But if you understand that the ant plays a role in a colony, in a community, and that ant was actually doing its function, and even if the ant died, but it survived the colony, then it actually succeeded. And if you see the ant inside the colony, inside it doing its job, then it makes sense. Today we're going to be talking about ants, and in a minute it's going to make a lot of sense why. We moved here to Cape Town about 6.5 years ago, and when we first moved, we would often ask people, what's the difference between Cape Town, Joburg, Durban? And I know that we have some people that aren't originally from Cape Town here today, but typically what people would tell us is that Cape Town is the lazy city, right? Cape Town's the one where if it's Friday, it's 3 o'clock and it's sunny, the bank is closed, right, Gersh? Bank is closed, we at the beach. It's sunny, it's beautiful, maybe not F&B, but the rest of us, if it's sunny on a Friday at 3, we're outside, work is over for the weekend. And now those of us that live in Cape Town, we get it, we just enjoy life. Those people in other cities don't have a life because there's not as exciting as Cape Town is, but that's the story, is that Cape Town is the lazy city. But the reality is that no matter where you live, we all know that laziness can be a problem in your life. Whenever we think of the term laziness, we often don't think about someone who's taken off work early for a hobby. We think about maybe a young teenager who's laying on the couch, refusing to get a job, sleeping in late every single day, just kind of mooching off of their parents without actually contributing. But laziness can look a lot of different ways. It can be endless procrastination. It can be avoiding responsibilities. It can be a lack of initiative. It can be constant excuses. It can be putting in no effort. It can even be excessive screen time. I mean, laziness can look a lot of different ways in our life. And it's okay to have a lazy day from time to time. In fact, you can look at God's word and see that on the seventh day, God himself rested to show us that we do need rest. So we're not saying to be workaholics today. We're not saying that you've got to be like this crazy person that works 20 hours a day. But we all know that that's typically not most of our struggle. Most of us struggle on the other side with lazy moments that creep up from time to time. And if laziness becomes a defining feature of our life, trouble awaits. You might remember a few weeks ago we talked about money, and there's quite a few proverbs that talk about laziness and diligence and wealth and how those things are connected. In fact, one of those was Proverbs 10 verses 4 and 5. It says, "A slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame." You might remember from that sermon that a slack hand, we're talking about like a bow and arrow where the string is slack. And so you can put an arrow on there and you can try to shoot it, but it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to go all over the show. And a slack hand, someone that's lazy, it does bring poverty. But a diligent person typically will be rewarded for that. Look at Proverbs 12:11. "Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense." So it is clear that laziness typically does lead to financial troubles, and hard work does pay off. But today, talking about laziness and diligence, it's actually deeper than that. It's more than just money. It's actually even more than just a character flaw. If you look at Proverbs around the topic of laziness, laziness is actually a moral issue. And as we look today, we're going to read several passages about laziness in our sermon. And as we go through these, there's a term that Solomon frequently uses for a lazy person, and that term is sluggard. Maybe you've heard that term before. It's a powerful word. It sounds like an old English word that we don't use anymore. To me, it sounds like a cranky old granny calling maybe her grandson, "You sluggard, get up and get a job and you stop being lazy," or whatever it might be. But it sounds like a slug, right? Someone that just we don't even know what slugs actually do. I mean, slugs just kind of slug around and they're not really good for anything. I don't think many of us would describe ourselves as a slug or as a sluggard. It sounds kind of harsh, but Solomon 13 times in the book of Proverbs uses the term sluggard, and he explains what a sluggard is like. And we're going to dig into some of those today. So let's look at Proverbs 20, verse 4. It says, "The sluggard does not plow in the autumn. He will seek at harvest and have nothing." So the sluggard is someone who expects a return without putting in the investment. Right? A sluggard is somebody that when it's time to prepare the soil, plant the seed, water, till the ground, they aren't doing anything. They're sitting back doing nothing. But when it comes time to harvest, they're expecting some return. And they're even looking at other people that are getting the return and saying, well, that's not fair. How come they're getting all those things? How come they're getting money right now and wealth and prosperity and I don't get anything? Well, that's not fair. So they have a disregard for the work that other people have put in. Now, we wouldn't call ourselves a sluggard, but have we ever found ourselves looking at the rewards that other people are getting and thinking, that's not fair? The sluggard in 26:16 is unteachable. 26:16 says, the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. So they assume that they know better. This is probably more of a problem for us men, but you ever walk into a room and assume that you're the wisest one there? That's a tough one, but that's what the sluggard does. They assume they're wiser than 7 men who can answer sensibly. Look at 22:13. The sluggard says, there is a lion outside, I shall be killed in the streets. The sluggard is someone that makes endless excuses and outlandish, ridiculous excuses. Now, when Megan and I first told our friends that we were moving to South Africa, they assumed that there would be lions in the streets. But anyways, we all know that this is an outlandish excuse to get out of work, to get out of a responsibility. And the sluggard is someone that makes endless excuses. Have you ever in your life found that you are in a cycle of making excuse after excuse after excuse? The sluggard is a constant burden to the employer. Look at 10:26. Like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to those who send him. Now, I know there's like a huge fad with apple cider vinegar and it's healthy for you and all those things, but as far as I can tell, most people that drink it, they kind of throw it to the back and as quickly as they can get it down, right? You don't want vinegar on the teeth. I don't really know how that would be. I think it would be unpleasant, but we all know that smoke to the eyes is unpleasant, and that's what the sluggard is like to the employer. The sluggard, the person who is going out to do a job, they're a constant bother and a constant irritation to the person who has sent them. Look at 21:25. The desire of the sluggard kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. All day long he craves and craves, but the righteous gives and does not hold back. Look at 13:4. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, while the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. What we see here is that the sluggard is ruled by his desires. The sluggard is someone that always has a big dream, always has a big goal. They're the ones at work that are saying, hey, one day I'm going to make it big. One day that's going to be me. One day I'm going to be the one that's on top. One day I'm going to have that corner office. But they're not doing any work to do it. And so their desires are effectively killing them. Their desires are driving them mad because they aren't actually willing to put the work in to do it. And look at 15:19. The way of a sluggard is like a hedge of thorns. The path of the upright is a level highway. It's like a hedge of thorns. You ever walk through the woods and there's thorns in the way, in the path, and you're getting snagged on your clothes, and maybe you got a friend with you and they're holding the thorns while you walk by, and as you walk around, you're getting stabbed by thorns over here, and now there's thorns everywhere. Well, the way of a sluggard is like a hedge of thorns. The thorns are all around. No matter how they try to maneuver their way through, they're getting snagged on the thorns of life, but the path of the upright is a level highway. The sluggard is unreliable, they're procrastinating, they're a constant source of irritation, and ultimately they're ashamed of their family. Now, when we think about the term sluggard or lazy, we often think about the extreme version of that. And we think about, well, I'm not like a sluggard. Sure, yeah, sometimes I can be a little bit lazy and some kind of things happen, but if you're like me and you read through these Proverbs, you think, sometimes I'm this way. Sometimes this is me. Sometimes this proverb can describe my life. And I might not be like a 100% sluggard, but a few people actually are. Do you ever expect a return without putting the work in? Do you ever consider yourself the wisest one in the room? Do you ever make endless excuses? What does your employer think about you? Does your employer think that you're the best thing that's ever happened to the company? Or do they wish that maybe you would find another place to work? Are your desires under control? Are you finding that the way of life around you is like a hedge of thorns? Or is it like a level, upright highway? Well, maybe there's a little bit of a sluggard in all of us. The good news is that Solomon doesn't just explain a sluggard to us, but he actually gives us the solution. And the solution is in Proverbs chapter 6, starting in verse 6. it says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man." The sluggard wants to gain without honest work, and Solomon tells the sluggard, go to the ant and study it. Understand the ant, consider the ant, and be wise. You know, there's actually thousands of species of ants. There's common ants that most of us know about. There's carpenter ants and pavement ants and black ants, Argentine ants, fire ants. There's a few ants that are kind of famous for their uniqueness. There's the bullet ant that's famous for its excruciating sting. There's a guy on YouTube that actually lets one bite him on the forearm, by the way. So I thought about showing it today, but it's like a 20-minute video. But it's definitely worth it. He also lets all kinds of other insects bite him. This guy's crazy. But anyway, the bullet ant is known for its excruciating sting. It has huge pincers on the front of its body. There's the leafcutter ant. Maybe you've seen a video of these from like the Amazon. They go and they bite off little pieces of leaves and they walk in a line back to the nest with those leaves. And they actually don't even eat the leaves. They use those leaves to grow fungus inside the nest, which they actually eat on. There's the weaver ant, which I didn't even know these things existed, but a weaver ant forms its nest in a tree by weaving leaves together with silk. It's crazy. Go home and Google a weaver ant nest and look at them. Some of them are like beautiful up in a tree, how they weave these leaves together. Then there's the honeypot ant, which consumes so much food that its abdomen will swell up the size of a small grape, literally like this big. It'll eat so much food that it's actually immobile, can't even move, and the other ants will come up to it to harvest the food out of the ant, and that's how this ant feeds its colony. Very common in the Middle East, where Solomon lived, though, is the harvester ant. And the harvester ant is famous for leaving the nest and finding seeds and grains and bringing it in and storing it in granaries inside the nest. And Solomon says to go to the ant, consider her ways, and be wise. And one of the reasons he says is in verse 7. Without having a chief, without having an officer, without having a ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. So there's no chief, officer, ruler, yet they prepare and they gather. They're productive without needing a boss, without needing someone to tell them what to do. You know, an ant colony can often have millions of ants, and there's different roles in an ant colony. We all know about the queen ant, right? The queen ant's the biggest one, but the queen ant doesn't actually give directions or orders. The queen ant has one job: lay eggs. That's it. And that queen can lay 1,000 eggs a day. But it doesn't give any direction. It doesn't boss anyone around. There's one queen ant, but there's thousands and sometimes millions of workers and soldiers and foragers and carers and maintainers and protectors. And scientists call ants self-organizing insects. There's literally no one telling them what to do. It's not even like the parents are telling them what to do, because the queen's the mom and she's just off laying more eggs. So an ant is just programmed to go and to do the job that it was programmed to do, like a robot. There's no restrictions, no quotas, no requirements, no forcing them or managing or motivating them. Ants have been programmed by God to work, and to work wisely for the good of the colony. Now, does that describe you? Someone that works with no restrictions, no quotas, no requirements, no rules, no oversight, no forcing, no managing, no motivating. That doesn't often describe most of us today in our jobs. If you run your own business or own your own business, you've had to learn how to force yourself to do these things because you don't have someone telling you what to do. But if you do have a boss, we often find that we aren't self-motivated like this. We just aren't. And so Solomon rebukes the sluggard in verse 9. He says, how long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. Now in verse 10, he's kind of poking fun at the sluggard. Yes, a little sleep is fine. A little slumber is fine. But he's mocking the sluggard because the sluggard's the one saying, just a little bit more. Just a little bit more sleep, a little bit more rest, and then I'll get to my work. Then I'll get to my job. And so in today's day and age, what Solomon might say is just one more snooze, just one more minute, just one more reel on TikTok, just one more text, just one more distraction, just one more break. And what Solomon is saying here is that the sluggard's life is characterized by little lost moments that lead to disaster. And if you're like me, and you think about your life, maybe this very week that we just finished, there are some days that just seem to get away from you, aren't there? There are just some days that the distractions come in and we fall prey to them. And there aren't even like bad distractions. I'm not like taking a nap in the afternoon, but I'm going and getting a little tea in the kitchen, and next thing you know, I'm watching a little YouTube, and next thing you know, 30 minutes has gone by, and I'm like, what's happened? And the sluggard is someone whose life is characterized by little lost moments over and over and over and over again. And what happens is verse 11. If you aren't careful, poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. This poverty is not just talking about lacking money, it's talking about lacking food. It's talking about lacking the necessity of life. In fact, Solomon makes a very clear distinction in Proverbs between the poor, who are poor due to circumstances beyond their control, and to poverty like this, which is due to laziness or to the sluggard's attitude. The poor are a special concern to the Lord, but poverty like this is something totally different. And so Solomon says, go to the ant. Study the ant. Consider her ways and be wise. See how they work without being ordered around. See how they do these things self-motivated. In fact, today, that's what we would say. We would say that they're self-motivated, which is a great thing, but it's actually beyond self-motivated. What's really happening here is the ant is community motivated. Now think about the difference here with me for just a minute, because I think this is one of the biggest problems with laziness in today's day and age. The ant is working really hard, but it's not just working with the idea that he's lifting himself up. He's not trying to make a career for himself or get a bigger house for his family, right? I mean, this is clearly a joke, but think about it. The ant is working for the good of the community. And if we want to be wise like an ant, yes, we have to work hard without being bossed, but we have to consider the community aspect of the ant and what that means for us today. You know, today in our modern, westernized European city culture, it's so individualistic. When we think about work and we think about why we go to work, we often, number one, think about it as a necessary evil. That work is bad, and I just have to do it because I have to provide for my family, and I don't want to let my family slip, so I have to do it, but I just can't wait for the weekend. I can't wait to retire. I can't wait to put this all behind me. Work is a bad thing. It's all about our hopes, our dreams, our goals, our desires. And often we think about the needs of the community as a threat to our goals, as something that's in the way, something that we have to jump over and hurdle over to get past. But the wisdom of the ant is not just that it works hard, but that it works hard within a community. It works hard and understands its role in the community. And we often isolate our work mentally from the community. We don't sit at our desk at work and think about how the work that I'm doing is a benefit to the community. Now listen, I'm not talking about your family and your siblings and your spouse and your children. We often think about that. I'm talking about the community as in people that you will never meet. We don't think about our job and how it blesses and benefits people that we will never meet. People that you don't know. Have you ever thought about that? That every good and decent job plays a role in community that helps people that you'll never meet. I mean, think about the job that you have. Some of us have jobs that directly help people every single day. Some of us are teachers. Some of us are doctors. Some of us do all sorts of things. And yes, you help that person, but you have a snowball effect and a domino effect with people that you will never meet. And every good and decent job that we do is good for the community. Have you ever thought about that? That the work that you do helps the human community flourish, even if you never meet them. And whether you work in a restaurant or a hotel or as an accountant or a pastor or a chiropractor or a teacher or a construction worker or an artist, I'm trying to get everyone's job that's in the room right now, and I'm leaving some of them out, but as long as you're not like a cocaine smuggler, then your job is good. And even if you don't see how it immediately helps the community, you play a role in the community. In the Western world, we don't think about that. Thankfully, some cultures do. We have a word here in South Africa, Ubuntu, right? That we're all connected. We help each other. And when you are working, work hard. Don't be someone that has to have a boss to motivate you. But don't lose sight of the motivating fact that your job plays a role. If you are looking at work as just something I have to just get through to get a paycheck, then you will struggle with laziness. You will struggle with motivation. But if you're someone that puts in flooring in apartments around Cape Town, you have a job that the community needs. And you're playing a part that blesses the community. You know, work is not a necessary evil. Work is something that God gave us in the Garden of Eden. Remember back then with Adam and Eve in the garden, before there was sin, before there was problems, God made them gardeners. He said, you're in a perfect environment and I want you to work. I want you to tend to the garden. I want you to care for the plants. I want you to care for the animals. Work is good. Work is what we need to flourish, and it's good for the community. And so part of the cure to laziness is to stop thinking about work only in relation to the money that it brings you. Yes, it brings you money, and that's good and necessary, but it's bigger than that. And the work that you do plays a critical job in the community. So if you want to consider the ant, work hard. Work hard without being told what to do. And number 2, don't forget the community aspect of your work. There's something else that it's in the New Testament that really kind of overrides all of this. And in Colossians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul says this: whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. It says whatever you do, not just spiritual things, not just Blake, you as a pastor. Of course, while you're a pastor, do it to the Lord. But me as a banker or a floor guy or a teacher it's different. No, it's whatever you do it like you're working for the Lord, and do it heartily. Do it wholeheartedly. That wholeheartedly means from the soul. I was listening to a sermon on this passage this week, and the pastor said, who does that? He said that word wholeheartedly means with zest. And he's like, who shows up to work with zest? Who shows up to work like ready to go? If you did that, your coworkers would probably be like, what's wrong with you, man? Like, are you okay? Are you sick today? Or stop doing this, you're making us look bad. Who shows up on the job with zest and excitement and zeal for what you're doing? But the scripture says, whatever you do it heartily as to the Lord and not to men. And then it says this, verse 24, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. There's something really important for us to understand here. We know from several other passages that if you are a believer, if you're born again, your faith is in Christ for salvation, your inheritance from God is not based on what you do. It's based on your standing with Jesus. That you've placed your faith in Him. He has forgiven you. It's grace through faith in the work of Jesus Christ on your behalf. And you're adopted into the family. And that's why you get the inheritance. So this verse here says to work to the Lord, heartily to the Lord, not to men, knowing that you will receive the inheritance from the Lord. So he's not saying work really hard so that you'll get an inheritance from God. He's saying work really hard for the Lord because you have an inheritance from God. You catch the difference there? You aren't working to get something. You're working because you already have something. There's a big difference there. So we aren't working hard just hoping that God will give us spiritual riches. We're working hard because we are a child of God. We are adopted into His family. And whether I work hard or not, I'm going to get that inheritance. But I work hard because I'm going to get that inheritance. I'm a child of God. I bear his name. I represent him to the world. When I work in the community, I'm a direct mirror to God. At least I should be. And so believers of all people should be the best workers, the hardest workers, one that don't need someone leaning over their shoulder, telling them what to do. As we work for Jesus like he's our boss, it's not like he's looking over our shoulder, telling us what to do and upset with us when we mess up. We're working for him because we bear his name, because we have an inheritance in heaven that can never be taken away. We're a child of God. We're adopted into his family. So work like it. Work like you're a child of God. Work like you're someone that has an inheritance in heaven that can never be taken away, that knows that the work that we do is good for society. Sometimes as we work, and all of us have earthly bosses, and whether it's someone directly over us or someone that we have to report to, whether it's investors or whatever it is, we all have people that we have to answer to. And sometimes we don't like those people. Sometimes those people drive us crazy. Sometimes we think, I want to work heartily. I want to show up and put my all in, but I don't like this guy. And the stuff he tells me to do, I don't agree with. You don't work for him. You work for the Lord. Well, I don't like how he says these things. You don't work for him. You work for the Lord. I don't agree with the direction. You don't work for him. You work for the Lord. Consider the ant. Work hard without being told what to do. Remember the community aspect. And don't forget that you are a child of God. You represent him to the world. And be the best workers that whatever company we're part of has ever seen. Not because it's going to get us more money and more recognition and a better raise. It might do those things. But because it pleases God, it brings honor and glory to him. And hopefully, it will show other people who our Lord is. Would you pray with me? God, we lift you up this morning. We thank you for the word that's so powerful. We go through these Proverbs, and some of them just at first glance seem like it doesn't really apply to us. But as we dig in, we realize that every single one of us struggles with this sometimes. Some of us more than others. And many of us, it shows itself in different ways. Laziness sneaks up in so many different ways, and we need to rest. We need to take a break. But sometimes the laziness and the sluggardliness can sneak in, masquerading as a break that we need when it's actually something that we don't need. So Lord, help us to find that balance. Help us to be someone that works hard, that we don't need someone to tell us what to do. We don't need someone to motivate us or reward us or get us in trouble. But that we're someone that works as hard as we can while we're working. Help us to remember the community aspect, that the work that we do has benefit to the community. It helps the people around us flourish, and people that we might never meet. And Lord, ultimately help us to do it all for you. Help us to work wholeheartedly with zest, as if you're our boss, to please you because of the inheritance that we have in heaven. And would it be for your glory, your honor, and your praise? We ask all this in your name. Amen.